Welcome to the Planet Trillion Trees podcast. I'm Eva Monheim.
And I'm Hal Rosner. We are both certified arborists through the International Society of Arboriculture. The purpose of our podcast is to encourage tree planting and proper tree care for our urban forests, which include neighborhoods, parks, and other open spaces.
We will also cover a myriad of tree topics, including the important role trees play in relationship to the climate crisis. Thank you for joining us.
Verdant Earth Educators provides dynamic in-person training and online learning opportunities for environmental and horticultural businesses. Owned by ISA-certified arborists and former university faculty, the Verdant Earth Educator team provides consultations on tree care and recommends climate-resilient opportunities for your valued green spaces. Verdant Earth Educators is all about seeding knowledge for success. Find Verdant Earth Educators at verdanteartheducators.com.
Monheim Microphones designs and handcrafts top-tier studio microphones and preamps right here in the United States in Hollywood, California. Their incredible line of innovative microphones and designs are used around the world by everyone from podcasters to top-charting record producers and singers. Monheim Microphones' unparalleled excellence. MonheimMicrophones.com. This podcast is being recorded on June 21st, 2024. Annaliese Bischoff is a Western Massachusetts artist and landscape architect. For the past decade, she has been collecting drawings and etchings of trees by Frank Waugh, founder of the landscape gardening program at what is today the University of Massachusetts Department of Landscape Architecture and Regional Planning. Annaliese received a bachelor's degree in art from Brown University and a master's in landscape architecture from the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. She began her academic career at Kansas State University, where Waugh had studied a century earlier. She taught for 40 years at the University of Massachusetts department that Waugh founded. Annaliese has received numerous awards and honors for her design and research work, including a Fulbright Senior Research Award. Before her academic career, she worked propagating trees in a nursery in Rhode Island and for the USDA Forest Service in South Carolina. The author of The Man Who Loved Trees, she currently serves on the Frank A. Waugh Arboretum Committee at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, home to 8,000 trees on campus, and teaches an honors discovery seminar on trees. Welcome to the Planet Trillion Trees podcast, Annaliese. We're delighted that you could be with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, we might as well get started and find out a little bit about your background and how you wound up in landscape architecture at UMass. And you have done a lot in your background, so please share with us.
Well, as I was a child, with my earliest memories, I had a passion for both nature and art. And I would wander off in the forest in southern New Hampshire on a property my parents bought. And I would just wander off on my own, discovering all the bounties of the woods. And I would do drawings and paintings of some of the things I found. So early on, I fell in love with trees. And I grew up both in Bristol, Rhode Island, and then Kingston, Rhode Island. And when I was in high school, I started taking courses at the University of Rhode Island. I took courses on trees and started learning over 200 trees and then couldn't wait to draw them. But when I went to college, I majored in art and I wanted to pursue my passion of making art, thinking maybe I'd go into designing exhibits for people. That was one interest. And then I got hired when I went to study in Germany for a year. After that year, I got hired by a German firm leading their activities program in England. I was working with German teenagers, and my interest of the environment extended to the built environment. I became fascinated by the parks and gardens and the estates throughout Great Britain, where I got to bring groups of 50 adolescents on trips there. And after that, I finished my undergraduate degree with my courses from Freiburg University and that time working for the German firm. And I started thinking about graduate school. And I thought, well, maybe I'll go into museum education and museology. But as I started looking into programs, I discovered the field of landscape architecture.
Nice.
And that field seemed to marry my passions for both art and nature. I was an avid hiker. And in this field just seemed perfect as a match. Here I could learn about the environment and design spaces for people. And it just seemed like the perfect direction. So I first applied and was accepted at the University of Massachusetts as a graduate student. And then I went on to the State University of New York, the College of Environmental Science and Forestry, because they offered me a teaching assistant and loved studying there. And so after that, I began as a zoning administrator, my first professional position. And I also worked for the U.S. Forest Service, doing visual assessment research as a GS5 landscape architect. And after those experiences, I got recruited into teaching at Kansas State University in Manhattan, Kansas, where I had never been, and I accepted the position sight unseen and fell in love with the prairies, the tall grass prairies, and really discovered that there had been a professor, Frank Waugh, who did his undergraduate and graduate work there. And after a year of teaching at Kansas State, I was recruited to become an assistant professor at UMass Amherst, where I had begun my graduate studies. And I was hired as the first woman in a tenure track appointment in the landscape architecture program. And during my time there, I discovered that Frank Waugh not only had founded that program, he moved there in 1902 and created a program in 1903 in landscape gardening, but he also made drawings and prints of trees. And this coincidence was just uncanny. In 2003, when our department was having its centennial, I began to discover his etchings in the public collections at our university, and I organized a show of his etchings. And of course, then I didn't own any, and I had to make appointments to see the collection, had to wear gloves, and that began my interest in researching his life and his work and his passion for trees. So I started seriously working on the book in 2008, and I just finished it this year. So it's been a lifelong pursuit professionally, but so rewarding. And discovering this man, his relatives today, and all of his interest, it was a work I just had to pursue. It's been so gratifying. And now being able to offer this book, it's just really quite remarkable. In 2019, I got a call from an antique business owner who had happened upon a collection of Frank Waugh's prints. And she thought they were very beautiful, had no idea what she could sell them for, what they were worth. And because I had done an exhibit at the university in 2003, she found me and contacted me. And I told her, well, he really wasn't a famous artist, unlike Frederick Judd Waugh, who was in the National Register. But he really was quite prolific. He had done over 223 etchings, which he listed. And I thought they were quite wonderful. So she invited me to come and look at them, and I purchased as many as she would let me buy. When I got home, a stack of them had been in an orange crate, and at the bottom of this box was a prospectus for a book to be called Tree Portraits by Frank Waugh, and a book he never was able to publish. And this just was yet another incentive to plow forward and make sure that there was a book about trees and Frank Waugh, one way or another.
So you actually gave Frank a voice in literature, I would say. And I think that's really commendable to be able to be unselfish and highlight someone else in your same career. And I think that goes to prove what kind of professor you have become as well. I really do believe that when someone highlights someone else in their own career, it's very telling about the person who's done the writing. The other thing that I want to ask you is all the work that you've done, did you find that deep, I want to say taproot into landscape architecture from a perspective that maybe other people might not have gotten in their own education. Is there something that you can share with our listeners, what you feel might be missing or lacking in some programs that landscape architects don't get?
Well, I'm really proud of the profession in how it is embracing climate change as well as diversity and equity. I think this is so key and so exciting. And so many of my former students are now leaders in this area. At the same time, I think there's a great need to really reach a broad audience, and not just through the profession, but through a commonality of being human. And I think through art, we reach a different kind of, just a different sort of chord in people. People who are able to relate to the beauty that trees bring us may not be as interested, at least starting on, with the science and all the important values and powers that trees bring us. And I think it's really exciting to be able to reach, especially children, sheerly on the basis of the beauty of trees and an emotional connection, to just love them for their beauty. And of course, they do so much else for us. I think the value of art is important to weave into the profession as well, and to not eclipse that. But I certainly appreciate the new professionalism and all of the technical aspects this field is broadening into. I think that's really important. And Frank Waugh himself started out more as a scientist, but deep down, he was an artist, and that's what he always wanted to do, but he didn't think he could make a profession of it. And so when two of his children did make a profession as artists, he started tapping back into his art roots. And it's amazing that at age 65, he took up etching. It's a complicated process. Every single plate has to be individually inked and then printed. I mean, it's an involved process. So I was just so taken by his devotion to creating art and representing the character of trees. I think this reaches a much broader audience than just professionals. I think it reaches anyone who appreciates looking at a beautiful work of art. Anyone who loves trees, I think, can appreciate the work that Frank Waugh did on so many levels.
Just one comment there. You were talking about his children. I think that sometimes we have children to actually give us a full circle and to bring us back to who we really are.
Yes.
And I think that's what happened with Waugh when I was reading your book, that he actually had to look at his children to realize who he was.
Yes. He was not only a wonderful father, but he was a very proud grandfather. And he would take his kids and his grandkids to visit beloved trees. And so there's a huge button ball in Sunderland, and he would have all the kids put their arms around and see how many it would take to fill just the diameter. And he basically loved taking people out. He knew the practical side of trees. He knew how to plant a tree and have it live. And he had the commercial side of starting an orchard.
Orchards, right?
Yes. And yet he waxed poetic as well, appreciating paintings by Corot of trees and trying to get his students to appreciate the fine paintings of artists from the 19th and 18th century. So he wanted to bring art to his students, not just the practical skills of successfully planting trees. He knew so much about them. And what's interesting is today he's really been forgotten. But in his day, he published over 20 books on trees, and actually over 30 books in all, and over 300 articles. He was very well known in his time. He would write under pseudonyms. So he would write for women's gardening magazines under one name, and then he wrote under Beeler and then under Smedley. So he would preserve his identity as a landscape gardener / architect. But he reached a lot of people in his time. And I think his message today is still really valid. What he really continued to push was getting every man, woman, and child to begin to appreciate trees. And he thought, well, not everybody is likely to go to an art museum and admire a painting on a wall. Not everybody's going to go into a museum or a gallery, but every single living person can access a tree and really embrace that beauty.
He really wanted his students to be connected with nature, not only trees, but nature. And I love the paragraph where you write about him having his students lay on the ground during a rainstorm to feel and look up to see what it's like to be rained on.
Yes.
That to me was powerful stuff.
And he would have his students over to his living room, and he would arrange neckties and have them give critiques on the design. And he would basically embrace crafts as well as art, as well as nature. And he was known as a Renaissance man because every day he also played music. He was very accomplished with his
flute
playing.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he even wrote music, but I think a lot of that has been lost. And he was an avid photographer. He patented some of just these devices to develop films. And he wrote in the Miniature Photographer. He published in a number of photography journals and magazines as well. He was, interestingly, a noted portrait photographer. Robert Frost sat for him and President McKinley. But he also had the janitors from the Mass Ag School sit for him. And he basically would capture their dignity. And he really had, I think, a wonderful way of respecting people. He really thought anyone who worked deserved great respect. And he promoted these values among his children as well as his students. So he was very prolific, and he just loved life.
One of my takeaways is that here in the year 2024, reading the biography showed me what people can do if they don't have a laptop distracting them all the time.
Yes.
Yeah, boy, oh boy.
Yeah.
Just to be able to pursue your passions with an uncluttered mind, it was a wake-up call for me.
No, he also was really drawn to the latest technology. He had a recording device, so he could have a secretary type up his books and his letters, and he basically wanted the latest everything. He loved automobiles. He always was proud to have, especially a Ford, but he could still ride his pony, and he would still take off and go overnight camping with his family. And I visited some of the spots where they would go, where they had their campsites. So he really never lost his connection with nature. And, he recommended plants and land uses for the Forest Service before the National Park Service was established. And he really helped influence the National Park Service. And his daughter, Dorothy, worked for the National Park Service in the 30s. So the whole family, I think, leaves a legacy of intrigue.
I noticed you gave some acknowledgement to subsequent generations. Were you able to speak to grandchildren or?
Oh, yes. And not only speak with, but meet with. I had the pleasure of meeting, and unfortunately, all the grandchildren that I had the pleasure of meeting and speaking on the phone and visiting their homes, they have all since passed. There is a great granddaughter in Lincoln, Massachusetts, who's been so helpful. She's an editor. She even volunteered to help edit the book, and she's loaned me a number of materials. But there was one granddaughter who moved to California, who was a noted mathematician. She and her husband published a book in mathematics, and she remembered very vividly what it was like to come visit her grandparents in Amherst, and gave a lot of anecdotes. And she really wanted to see my book out, and she was so helpful. And her sister and brother lived in the Washington, D.C. area, and they were able to come up and actually attend the opening of the exhibit in 2003, which was very thrilling. So I was in touch with the grandchildren very early, and basically was able to borrow the daily diaries that Frank Waugh kept from the years 1905 to 1922 from Dr. John Waugh, who was a brilliant MIT professor. Sadly, he passed in 2014. And since then, I don't know what's happened to the diaries, nor does Alice Waugh know. But I was able to make copies of every single daily entry. And unfortunately, those were not the years I was most interested in, because Waugh took up etching in 1934, and he continued etching until 1943. And those years were missing. No one seemed to know what happened. But lo and behold, the Loeb Library, Harvard University, was approached by a bookseller who had acquired those diaries, the years from 1923 to 1943. And the Loeb Library purchased the entire collection. And I discovered this during the pandemic. But as soon as the visiting restrictions were lifted, the library granted me permission to come access their collection. And I was able to confirm all of the anecdotes which granddaughter Margaret had given me. And I had proof positive. So it was very exciting to find. And so now I have digital copies of all of those days as well. And I'm so pleased that the Loeb Library had the funds and the interest to preserve these records. So they had the vision to know that this is important work. And although perhaps Waugh has fallen out of favor, his work really will always be important. And I really believe that his etchings are timeless. Maybe his writing is antiquated, but those etchings are every bit as relevant, and they capture the spirit of the tree. He wanted to do etchings so that they could be reproduced in a book clearly. And he thought photographs wouldn't show the character of the tree as clearly. It would have been harder to isolate that character. So he thought etchings would be the best way to represent trees. And then second best, he thought drawings, ink drawings. Third best, photographs. So the fact that I now own 200 etchings and drawings is really thrilling. And I will be having some exhibits this year at a local library and then at UMass in the Design Building Gallery in April. We're going to have a wonderful Earth Day celebration this next April.
Oh.
We'll celebrate the entire month of April.
Fantastic.
That's wonderful.
The other thing, again, getting back to that theme of days gone by and innocence, and you grew up in Rhode Island, if I'm remembering correctly. Just looking at the etchings and getting a sense of how much our country has changed since the early 1900s, or, when the professor was doing that work, the sardine factories and the little fishing villages, and they're not remote places. They're right along the East Coast. And if you were to go out there today, what would you find? Possibly a strip mall and a stretch of highway. So I appreciated that he was capturing images like that may very well not be coming back. Although
Ogunquit and Eastport, Maine have held on to the charms. So Eastport has lost the sardine factories, but there's still a thriving art center, and it's a wonderful culture, and it is still remote. And the culture there, I think, is alive and well. It's really remarkable.
Oh, that's great news. I'm so glad to hear that.
Yes, the Tides Institute basically has gotten some grants to add an addition, and they basically support the artists really well. It's a wonderful town to visit.
And then you found the prospectus in the bottom of the orange crate.
Yes.
And am I right? The speculation was that America was at war or about to go to war. And so going ahead and publishing a book like that might not have been the best use of paper and ink.
Yes, I think that was a good part of it. And it's interesting that Waugh tried several publishers with whom he had published before, but no one really, and one publisher had the book for over a year. I can relate to that. And then in the end, he was trying to get his daughter to help find a publisher, and they never found one. So I don't know what happened to the actual manuscript, but I know for a fact that I own a lot of the intended illustrations. They were the very ones. I'm sure I will be giving my collection to either the Jones Library in Amherst or the University of Massachusetts Special Collections, also in Amherst. So they will be, I think, available for future generations. But I think what is so helpful today, I'm now working with some elementary classes. It's wonderful to have this retirement status. I still teach part-time, but I'm able to choose what projects I can take on. So I'm able to go into some elementary classrooms and lead some exercises on trees. And this next year, with the help of some colleagues, going to basically have a call for drawings of trees from our UMass Arboretum. And we're going to entertain drawings from the community of their favorite trees in the Arboretum. There are over 8,000 trees on campus, 350 different species. And we're going to select some of those works to include in our exhibit in April in the Design Gallery building. I'm going to gift some mini sketchbooks and pencils to help fuel the interest in this. And I think something happens when you actually look a line, draw a line, and you have a connection that's different than simply snapping a picture or simply looking. I think you have a more considered connection with a tree. And I think that is giving you a kind of bond with the tree that is very different than just walking by a tree or looking at a tree or even taking a picture of a tree. I think you become more vested, and somehow there's that very profound awareness that you're a living creature and the tree is a living creature. And I remember from childhood feeling so tended by trees. I couldn't understand why people would say, don't stand under a tree in a thunderstorm. I always felt protected, and I always felt like the shade of a tree. There was something very enveloping. And I think if you then actually do a drawing of a tree, that is somehow deepened. And I think people who like to draw can fall in love with trees all the more.
I really liked the section where you talked about him saying, that it's 3 trees, groupings of 3s and groupings of 5s and groupings of 7s. And why not 2? Why not 2?
Yeah.
I mean,
right.
Having to
why not 4?
pair a couple. And I love the drawings that represent that couple and how they kind of move together, grow together, lean in together. And it just goes to show you that, as you mentioned, the living tree is a living being. And I think most of the time we forget that.
Yes. And I love the fact that Waugh wrote so prolifically about composition. And a lot of this was influenced by his looking at paintings by Impressionists. And he basically, he just loved looking at paintings and how artists would have their design composition. And he wrote about design principles, and he taught about design. I think he very much influenced the United States Forest Service, where all of their wonderful ways of handling clear cuts. He was basically promoting design education and simple design principles, as well as the practicality. And he spent a lot of time talking about the groupings of trees. And then he really was one of the most prolific promoters of native planting design. And of course, he always understood the associations, but he started understanding, I think, more the value of trees just knew how to do it. Right tree, right place, the environment.
Can I ask you how you think this is changing your perspective after writing the book as a professor when you go in the classroom? Do you always think of him when you're teaching now, or?
I really do think that Waugh is an inspiration. And when you read one master's thesis actually included interviews with former students by Waugh, and the testimonies they gave were so heartfelt. And it's really inspiring. I think I wasn't a very good professor when I started, but I've gotten a lot better. And I think the inspiration I've taken has been from Waugh in how giving he was. And I now always bring his spirit into the classroom. He wasn't so concerned with, just equations, but he really wanted people to have an experience and to just have a real life experience. He made trees real for people, and he brought the environment. Basically, he was not somebody who was teaching out of a book. He basically brought kids out into the landscape, and he wanted to engage them directly. So whenever I can, I now make time to go out in the landscape, and I'm doing some kooky things with my students, and it's great fun. I also think it's a lot of important learning that people will never forget. I think that's more memorable, and in the end, I think has more influence than book reading itself. Although I love books too, mind you.
You had mentioned his journals, and I know you didn't find the ones that you wanted to, but strange question. What was his handwriting like? And then the follow-up to that is, what kind of things did he write about as part of his daily entries?
Well, a lot of his daily entries were really boring. And in the very end, I was able to get to the ones I wanted through the Loeb Library. So I was able to confirm who he studied with, how long he studied. A lot of times he doesn't say very much. You'll get a little note that the weather was hot, or they had a lot of snow. So you'll get a weather update. And he'll also write that he wasn't feeling very well and he was going to go for a treatment in Northampton. But every once in a while will be a gem and he will write something really significant. So during his 1910 sabbatical in Germany, he writes about his experience with Willy Long. And basically you can find out how he was influenced by this German landscape architect. Waugh knew German very well. And I was able to document a lot of things. His handwriting was not the easiest to read. It was elongated. In one year, I took his daily diaries. I think it was the year 2010, because I wanted to read them very carefully. I would post his entry for one day, and then I would write my own entry for the day. And it was basically 100 years apart. Two professors from Amherst. And I had a lot of fun with that. I don't think anyone ever read these, but I was able to get his handwriting down. And I was able to tell that in 1943, when Frank Waugh got sick, it was his wife, Alice, who made the entries. And I know her handwriting really well, too, as she was at his side. And she helped print some of these etchings. She basically made beautiful gardens and was very important to his work as well. She doesn't get enough credit. I'm speaking about Dorothy Waugh and Alice Waugh, as well as Frank Waugh, September 19th in the Landscape Architecture Department, in the Zuby Lecture. And they will record that, and it will be available 2 weeks after to anyone interested.
That's exciting. That's very exciting. Well, there's a lot of takeaways from the book, and I have to commend you for finding the parallels between your life and Waugh's life and how intricately they connected and how that made you want to publish a book about him. I think that's very fortuitous.
My dear friend and colleague, Mark Resnick, who is writing a book about Dorothy Waugh and will have a major exhibit about her work in 2025 at the Poster House in New York City, basically wrote that I was destined to write this book. And he and I have shared a lot of the research findings, and we have just become such fans of the Waugh family and these unsung heroes and heroines. We're here to tell the stories today.
It's nice to have those kind of stories that you can go back to and really understand how the foundations of landscape architecture started. I thought that was really fascinating. The interruption and the back and forth of what name will be selected, and landscape architecture had a better sounding terminology so that you could charge more.
Yes.
And I was like, okay, you can't be a gardener anymore. You have to be a horticulturalist, or you have to be a landscape architect to be able to get the fee that you well deserve.
But Waugh represented the people, and he held out to the term landscape gardening so long because he thought it was friendlier and more accessible. And that's how he was. He wanted everybody to be able to enjoy the work and all of the benefits. So he was a very selfless guy.
Well, I have to say that we still were arguing about it, even with the landscape gardening program at Longwood, and our program, was horticulture and landscape architecture at Temple. And then when John Collins got there, the landscape architect, he changed it to landscape architecture and horticulture. And the school was founded on horticulture, but landscape architecture took precedent, and depends on who's in charge, but also where they see the professions going.
Yes, I think that's so true.
Yeah, and speaking to that, you had mentioned earlier, I wonder if we could just jump back, that you see the new incoming students having more of a focus on issues regarding climate change and, designing accordingly to address carbon footprint and the climate catastrophe, and also equity and diversity. Would you be able to speak to that a little bit more?
Well, I think it's high time we look at the scorching neighborhoods in the poorer cities that just don't have those luscious tree-lined LAs that you find in the well-to-do communities. It stands to reason everybody should have wonderful trees. And I think that's one area. Of course, there's much more than just street trees, but that's one area that I think is very easy to identify and something we can certainly work on. I also think we've made such a mess of things that how we begin to clean up the environment is important. There's a professor in public health at UMass who's working in a neighborhood in Cicero, and she's asked if I might comment on the trees they want to plant in a garden in a neighborhood to help improve, to just clean up the soils and maybe get rid of some of the toxicity. Because in this neighborhood, they have very high rates of cancer among the residents. And again, it's a more poor neighborhood. So the other thing I am very interested in learning more about, even at my retired age, is how trees and also fungi can help solve some problems of toxicity, and very interested in mycoremediation as well, as phytoremediation. So if I were actively practicing, I would want to be working in that area today. That's, I think, so key to how we can help improve some of the messes we've made and really just get our health back. The connections between trees and mycorrhiza, we know not enough about. So I think more experiments and more implementation, that's an area of interest I still have.
Is there a speaker or a book or some research that really lit you up in terms of cleaning up the environment with mushrooms? It is a very exciting frontier.
Well, basically, Trad Cotter's book, I get the title right, Organic Mushroom Farming and Mycoremediation, was the first book that caught my eye. And then I was able to go to mushroom camp out in Sonoma, California.
That's great.
I loved it out there. And met Paul Stamets. And basically, he was also singing the praises of mycoremediation.
Yeah.
What I am doing, since I live in the woods out in Leverett, Mass., one of the things that I am doing is I make paper from fungi, and I make ink from oak galls, as well as I'll be making ink from black walnut husks this fall. So I'm becoming more organic with my own art making, and that's exciting. And we have a local woman who studied with Paul Stamets, Julia Coughlin, who has started a business called Mycoterra. And we'll see if there might be some opportunities in the future to do some experimenting. I have no experience in this particular direction, but I would love to partner up with a firm and offer my research abilities. So this is something that, now that the book is done, I have time for some new projects.
Fantastic.
That's interesting that you're talking about dyes and things like that. When I taught food crops, we had the art school from Temple came and had a dye garden for the students so that they could make their own paints. And, that was really important. And one of the things I had to do for research for my artwork was to find out about paints and the 250 different colors of paint that you get from walnuts.
Yes. It's amazing.
It was Grumbacher Paints years ago. I interviewed them, and wow, it's really fascinating to find out where our dyes and our paints come from.
Yes. Last year I had a Mass Cultural Council grant. I was able to do a walking interpretive trail on all of the different colors of fungi that are local. And I called it the Roy G. Biv of local fungi. And my own illustrations, and basically of all the color hues, we had 24 different fungi represented that you could find in the landscape. It was like the story walk of design of posters on wooden sticks. And at the same time, I had an indoor exhibit of the works in our local art center in Leverett. So that was really very exciting. And my local mycological society helped me with making sure I had everything correct. So that might be a little book. It's a niche interest. No publisher's been interested yet, but that was the same thing with the Waugh book. So I have the work done, and it was a great pleasure to do the illustrations. And the mycopigments that you can make from these fungi are phenomenal. I have done dyeing from lichen as well. There's a fuchsia color from rock tripe, which you can find in Western Massachusetts on the north-facing granite slopes. And it's unlike any other. I mean, you don't think it's a natural color. And the rock tripe look like elephant ears. They're sort of blackish, dark greenish. And if you judiciously harvest just a little bit, you can get these bright fuchsia color dyes. It's phenomenal. It takes 9 months to cure the dye. I learned about that in California.
Wow.
So yes,
That's exciting.
There was a woman named Dorothy Beebe who did a book all about dyes from mycopigments. I've learned quite a bit from her.
Well, it's lovely to have all things fungi getting their moment. I hope it escalates and really grows exponentially.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a mushroom person. I had them for breakfast.
Well, actually, one of my endorsers for the book basically has written a book on fungi, and we actually got her blurb a little wrong. This is Eugenia Bone.
Oh, yeah.
She actually wrote that this book would be a wonderful addition to any tree lover's library, and it got written down of any book lover's library. So she called me out on that, but she's really wonderful with all of her books. She's such a great popular science writer, very powerful. And 2 years ago, I think it was, she decided to edit a book, a culinary book on fungi, and it's called the Fantastic Fungi Community Cookbook. And I got invited to include 4 recipes there. It was during the pandemic. We had a book launch online, including England and Europe. I mean, so it was really great fun. And it's been wonderful to get to know her virtually. I love her writing.
Well, before we go, we have to ask our favorite question. That is, what is your favorite tree right now?
Okay. I started and I kept going.
She put her glasses on. I think she has a list.
Yeah, I saw
that. So this is sort of like if you win an Academy Award, you want to make sure you thank everybody.
Oh, that's great.
Yes. I want to make sure I thank my trees. And so I made a short list, and it includes sourwood, which I just planted, black tupelo, ironwood, honey locust, ginkgo, beech, the sawtooth oak, hickory, chestnut, tulip, walnut, apple, cherry, maple, birch. And I have to include sumac, witch hazel, and sassafras. And there are many more, but those had to make my list because I have special fondnesses for each and every one of those.
Is there one in particular that you see on a regular basis or gravitate towards in the landscape when you might be designing?
Basically the beeches, the magnificence of the beeches, the way they can envelop you, and the access to the trunks. Yeah, they're just phenomenal. The majesty of the beaches. And I was able to visit Burnham Beaches outside of London, or part of London, and I have a video from 1910, which is when Waugh would have visited them, of the majesty of that stand, which the Brits had the genius to preserve. So, and in Newport, there are wonderful beaches as well. So I've had a long-standing love. We have some wonderful beaches at UMass, one of which just died, but they're just so magnificent.
Where are the Waugh archives today?
Yes, basically the Robert Cox Special Collections archives are up on the 23rd floor, I believe, of the Du Bois Library. And
at UMass?
At UMass.
Okay.
And then the Special Collections of the Jones Library also has a lot of wonderful family records, including Frank Waugh materials as well. So there are 2 public collections, and they are available. The lantern slides, which Waugh hand-colored, are available digitally. And I think there are over 800 of them that a former professor, Hal Mosier, donated to the special collection, and they have digitized them. So you can actually go, and they have indexed them. So you can just pick a topic or a place and see if there is a beautiful lantern slide of him on that topic, or about him, or that he made. They're really magnificent.
So it's not just etchings then, the lantern slides?
No,
right.
His books, his writings, newspaper articles about him, tributes to his 25 years of service at the university, tributes to his retirement, which was in 1939. And he was so worried that, what's he going to do after retirement? Very few people realize that that's when the war was starting, World War II.
Right.
And he actually worked full time. He continued teaching full time until he passed in 1943. But it was Mass State College then. And because he had turned 70, they weren't able to pay him. So he worked gratis for all those years at teaching full time in the end.
Wow.
In the department he founded. And so it stands to reason a year after he had passed, the President Baker, basically designated an arboretum in his honor. I think it's a wonderful tribute to him, and that continues today. So I think it's important. There is a new webpage of Frank Waugh, and they have just done a page about who Frank Waugh is to give full credit to his remarkable life and personality. So I think that does him justice.
Well, I hope we get all those links when we put your podcast out, including the upcoming exhibit in 2025, because I have a feeling this episode is going to create some new fans, or at least raise the interest in Professor Waugh. And it'd be great for people to be able to chase down the exhibit and get up to Massachusetts and maybe hear your lecture.
I will send you some links that exist already. And I am now on the Frank Waugh Arboretum Committee. So I have their new link, which is exciting. And I also have the link to the special collections. That's available. Yeah, it's really exciting to see all of these connections and have the interest. The Historical Society in Amherst has also invited me to speak about Waugh in October. So I will have a number of engagements. And
I think you're going to have a busy year.
I think so.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and we can put all those links underneath your bio on our website so
excellent.
That people can link in.
Thank you so much. This is really exciting.
We appreciate your diligent work on your book.
Yeah.
We really honor you for what you have done for Frank Waugh and his family. And we wish you continued success.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. I really loved it. And I loved getting to know you.
I enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much. You're both wonderful.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Plant a Trillion Trees podcast is edited by Andromedan Recordings in Hollywood, California.